Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Nick. Today I'm going to be talking to you about what is mixing and mastering. So when I was younger, the concept of mixing and mastering was so confusing to me. I'd hear of people recording records and then hear them saying that the record went off to mixing and mastering so it'll be ready in a few weeks. And I was like, wait, but a few weeks? Didn't you record everything already? Isn't everything already done? And that was my naive jazz school mentality that, oh, every performance has to be the perfect performance and all these musicians in the studio are perfect and everything is spot on. But even with the best of musicians, there needs to be some sort of mixing and mastering to tweak the sounds. Now essentially all mixing is taking the sounds that are already recorded and enhancing them and making them balance well nicely with each other. This is usually done in a DAW like Pro Tools or Ableton or Logic, and it's essentially perfecting the recording side of things. When you're in the mixing process, you're using all sorts of plugins and you're balancing the tracks all nicely so that way they work together, and you're using things like EQ, compression, reverb, and so on. Recently I took a class with Kevin Killen for a semester on mixing, and he actually argues that mixing begins in the pre-production process. So it starts at the very beginning. So whenever you're going into the studios to record, there's a few steps. First, you have to write a song, or you have to know what you want to record. Then you have to get the players that you want on the session. Some people, it's just them. Some people just record all the parts. And then you may or may not have an arrangement, but then you go into the studio and start recording. There's usually an engineer who's going to set up the mics and record everything. And there's a producer who's going to basically kind of direct the sound of where the record should be going. And Kevin Killen actually argues that the mix actually begins at the very beginning in the recording process, because he says if you don't have great sounds from the beginning, you're not going to be able to get a great mix. So then once everything is recorded and everything's in place, all the overdubs are done and everything's all good, then usually it gets sent off to an editing assistant if the project has a budget for that. If not, it goes to the mixing engineer and then the editing process takes place. And that's more of a logistical thing. There'll usually be some sort of template, and it's essentially just chopping off, like for example, if someone dropped their keys in the middle of a take when they weren't playing, chopping that off, or chopping off the beginning of the tune where no one's doing anything, or doing fades and stuff like that, just like technical little things. And then you get into the real mixing process where you then have a bunch of audio tracks and it's your job to enhance it, make it sound better, and make it sound good and almost radio ready. I'm going to be taking you through that process with a song that I produced actually for my living room. It was for my video of Frosty the Snowman, where I recorded all the instruments, mixed it, mastered it, and edited the video, and then put it on YouTube. If there's a song that you need mixing and you want to send it to me, check out the link in my description. There's a few other mixing samples on there, and feel free to shoot me a message. If these sort of things interest you, please like and subscribe. If you haven't seen the video on Frosty the Snowman, check it out up here. Then finally, after the mixing step, after probably a few revisions, then the mixes would go off to a mastering engineer. Then the mastering engineer would put it to a place where it used to be called Radio Ready Songs. Now it's more like Spotify ready, YouTube ready, streaming platforms, because not too many people are listening to the radio these days. And essentially in the mastering process, it's really bringing up the levels and carving out the overall sound of the song. One tool in the mastering engineer's toolbox is compression, and the way I like to think of it is kind of like when I'm watching TV and I'm watching Hulu and the ad is so obnoxiously loud, and the TV show is a lot quieter in comparison to the ads. So that bothers me because every time an ad comes on, I have to like mute the TV or turn down the volume and then turn it back up when the ad is finished and when I'm watching the TV show. So what compression does is essentially it squashes the sound, it takes the high and the low dynamics, and it pushes it together so that way it's a more even sound throughout. Another example of this is when you're in the car and you're listening to a song and there's like a really soft section, so you turn up the volume, and then there's like a really loud section and it's cranking and you have to turn it down because you just blew out your speakers. So compression essentially evens this out and gets us a really nice balance, so that way the listener doesn't have to worry too much about turning up and down. It also makes the quiet parts more audible and the loud parts more loud. So now without further ado, I'm going to turn around to my desk. We're going to look at Frosty the Snowman, which I have up here. Alright, so now I've got this Logic project open. I apologize in advance for the computer noise because I'm not only recording the screen but using Logic, but also recording the audio. So there might be a little bit of noise in the background. I apologize in advance for that. Anyway, here's the Logic session. We have basically three instruments. There's drums, there's guitar, and there's bass. So the first thing is that I have everything color coded. So the drums are orange, then the bass is brown, and the guitar is green. These are arbitrary colors. I usually like the bass brown because I think of an upright bass, and an upright bass is brown most of the time. I've seen yellow ones too, but... So I'm going to sort of walk you through the layout of this session. So I used 5 mics for the drums. We have 2 overheads which are being sent to this subgroup. So essentially all I did was I told these 2 tracks to go into this track. So that way when I put a plugin on it, I only have to do one plugin instead of adjusting it on both. Makes it a lot easier. And also if I want to control the volume, I just control it from here instead of these bottom 2. Then I have a kick drum mic, I have a snare mic, and then I have a center mic. I spelled it the British way for some reason, don't ask me why. And that was an Electro Voice 635A that I put basically right above the bass drum and in front of the snare drum. If you want to know more about some of these recording techniques, I made a video on how to get a budget tree recording, and I basically used all the practices that I used in this video. So check that out. Then I had a bass going DI. This was my This was my roommate's Lakeland 5-string bass. And then I had 2 mics on the guitar. I had a Royer R10 ribbon mic, and then I also had a Warm Audio 47 Junior as a room mic, which was essentially I just kind of put it in front of the guitar, pretending that would be an enhanced camera mic. And it kind of gives a feeling that you're in the same room, so that's really nice. So I'm going to play you just the ribbon mic. And then I'm going to blend in the room mic so you can kind of hear how it sounds. So with that, you can kind of hear like the attack of the pick on the strings, and you hear a little bit of the room and how the amp sounds from kind of far away. Another thing that I learned from Kevin Killen was that the best place to point the mic is where it sounds best in the room. And I've always thought of that, like, you wouldn't really go to a club and put your ear in front of the guitar's amp, or else you're gonna blow your ears out. So I've kind of followed that logic, you know. And I did both. I put a mic in front of the amp, and I also put a mic in front of me. And that's a super common thing that I have done in basically all of my solo guitar videos. So I recommend doing that. If we look at our mixer window, in Logic that's Command 2. If you're in Pro Tools, it's Command $. I'm not exactly sure for the other DAWs, but this is how you open the mixer window. And as you can see, there's a bunch of things that I have on here. These are all plugins, and then there's some specific routing, and then you see the faders are a little different, and there's panning. So to get back to the timeline view, you click Command 1. If you're in Pro Tools, just click Command equal again, or you can just close the mixing window. But anyway, so now what I'm going to do is select all the tracks, and I'm going to go back to the mixer window. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable all of the plugins so that way you can hear exactly how this sounds as I recorded it. So first I'm going to disable all the plugins, disable all the buses so nothing's sending anywhere, and reset the panning. So to reset the default settings, just make sure to option click, and so everything's neutral. Alright, so now I'm going to play you everything from the intro. Skip it a little bit until the A section. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen the mixing window, and I'm going to undo everything and kind of just show you how I got to where I got to. And you're going to hear the difference between the sounds. So this is the unmixed version. Now I'm going to start to undo everything. And this is a fully mixed version. So as you can see, there's kind of a big change. So usually there's kind of this sort of step-by-step approach to mixing, but I usually skip between the steps a little bit. But essentially the first thing that happens is that you work with the faders. So as you can see here, nothing is at 0. For example, the overheads are -7.2 and the snare drum is -5.7. The guitar R10 mic is -2.5. So now I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the processing that I have going on some of these things. So let's listen to the drums by themselves. I'm going to solo this. So there's a few things I have on here. I have this compressor that is kind of doing some pretty mild compression. And essentially all it's doing is that it's making sure that the loud parts aren't too loud and the quiet parts aren't too quiet. So this is without it. And this is with it. It's a really subtle effect. And then I had this little EQ. There's some like not so nice frequencies that I wanted to take out, so I just took them out. Here we have this saturator on the snare drum and also on the center mic. And essentially all it does is it kind of like makes it a little juicy. It brings out some of the overtones in the snare, and it makes it a little more aggressive sounding. So here is without it. It gives it like a nice punch, and I think it sounds really cool. So on the bass I have this UAD-610B preamp, and it's essentially a tube preamp that makes it sound a little fatter. So this is without. And that's with. So it gives it a lot more depth and a lot more body. Then it's going to some slight reverb. I have this Lexicon 480L, and it's basically giving it a little bit of room sound to kind of like put it in the same room as everyone else. And then a little bit of plate. I like to do this with DI just because it makes it sound a little more realistic. So if I turn off all the processing, it sounds like this. And it basically just kind of sweetens the sound. It's not doing anything super drastic, but it makes a little difference and it makes it sound like you're in the room. It makes it a little more like intimate. So then finally with the guitars, there's not really too much processing on it actually. I don't have anything on the guitars themselves, but they are sending to different buses. So for example, the R10 is setting to the replica, which is a delay. So I'm going to show you with a delay and without. So it sounds a lot thinner. So this delay is only 10 milliseconds, it's a very short delay, and basically it's kind of acting like as a doubler. It makes it just a little more thick of the texture. Then for the room mic, I put a plate on it just so everything has the same reverb. Every instrument is going through the plate reverb, so that way it kind of puts it in the same room. And then finally on the mix bus, I have kind of like my mastering chain. So I'm going to play you the mix before the mastering chain and then after the mastering chain. So not only is it a little bit louder, but it's a little more exciting. So on here I have the same compressors before. Again, it's not really doing too much. Just this is kind of what they call the glue, and it kind of just like makes everything gel nicely together. Then I have this Pultec EQ, which is boosting some of the high and low frequencies. And the Pultec is a tube EQ, so it makes everything a little warmer, a little fatter, so I really like putting that on. Then I have the Oxford Inflator, which honestly just makes things sound better and closer. This is another plugin I got from Kevin Killen, and it just sounds really awesome. And then finally I have the Ozone 8 Maximizer, which is basically a limiter. It's basically like chasing the sound so that way it hits a certain volume. Over here you see there's a learn threshold and a target threshold of -14 LUFS. So essentially what that is that all the streaming platforms and all the platforms have a sort of like sound level. And if you hit that level or you exceed it, they're going to bring you back down. Well, and if you're not close enough to it, they're going to pull you up. And that's something that you don't want to do because you spend all this time getting a really good mix and then someone just comes in and like kind of messes you up. They just really like readjust the volume for you, and like all your hard work is kind of gone. Not all of it, but yeah, they just kind of readjust. So it's a really good tool to be able to have the streaming service not really interfere with your mixes or masters. So now I'm going to show you a few things. I'm going to play the track without any plugins on it and with all the faders at 0. And then I'm going to engage the mixing stuff, and then I'm going to put the master plugin so you can kind of see the whole process. So I'm going to play it from the guitar solo. This is labeled Scred A8. So this is the mix now. Now I'm going to engage the mastering. And so basically that's mixing and mastering. So check out the full video to hear how the song sounds, the final product, and yeah. So that was my little video on what mixing and mastering is. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I'm making new videos every Monday and Thursday at 3 p.m, sometimes Saturday at 1 p.m. As always, please leave a comment. I try to reply to all my comments and answer any questions that anyone has. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you next time.